Welcome to something special. Welcome to TEDx. This TEDx event is part of a global conversation that takes place every day in every corner of the world. In schools, in theaters, in workplaces, even in prisons, people gather to hear the best ideas bubbling up in their communities. More than 3,000 TEDx events are held every year in 170 countries. It's a remarkable thing. TEDx events are self-organized under a license from TED, a non-profit organization devoted to discovering and sharing powerful ideas in the form of TED Talks. It's not TED itself, but your local TEDx team of volunteers that has done all the work to put on today's event, including booking all of the speakers. It's this team's ideas, dedication, and time that have made this possible. We really hope today's program sparks an exciting conversation. This is a day for curiosity and for skepticism, for inspiration and for action. The more you enter into it, the more you will take out. And now, on with the show.
Welcome to TedxYouth ReddamHouse. My name is Quinn Liu and I will be your host this afternoon. I begin today by acknowledging the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, traditional custodians of the land on which we gather today, and pay my respects to the elders past and present, and I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. TedxYouth ReddamHouse is an independent youth-organised event designed to share ideas, and a lot has happened to get us up to this point. Today we will have a total of 8 speakers and 2 musical performances, as well as 2 live Q&As, which will happen around the middle and the end of this event. So as each talk occurs, please take down any questions you have, and we will try to get through as many as possible and discuss them during the Q&As. Now, I would also like to quickly acknowledge all the people, the speakers, the speaking coaches, and everyone behind the camera who has participated in making this event happen. When the forms were first sent out to apply for this event, I myself hesitated for multiple days because of sheer nervousness. I didn't know if I wanted to apply or if I was just too scared, because I figured there's a really small chance of me, this random girl, becoming the MC of this massive event. But then I figured, well, what's the worst that can happen? Who's going to remember some random name on a Google form from like 3 years ago? And so I applied, and now here we are today, because no matter how small, there is always a fraction of possibility. The theme for today is going to be no matter how small, and you're going to get a variety of talks from a variety of people with different experiences, and you're going to learn a new thing, hopefully, from each and every one of them. Because our philosophy for tonight is going to be, you learn a bit, you grow a bit. Because learning should never stop, or at least for the next few hours. Now, from our sponsor.
Simple, small choices. We all make thousands of those every day. And like me, you've probably heard that those choices have the power to change our lives. But who really thinks about that? I will be the first to admit it's not something I ever thought a lot about until small choices was all I had and changed my life forever. So imagine my mates and I, we've just finished a military training exercise, successfully completing another step on the pathway to our dreams. The last week's been filled with challenges. We've had all sorts of things thrown at us, and instructors have observed and assessed our ability to lead. Thankfully, we've passed, and now we're boarding the buses to head back to the Australian Defence Force Academy. A good mate of mine is saving me a seat on the first bus, but there's no room for my gear underneath it, so I choose to get on the second bus instead. Climbing aboard, I choose a seat, sink into it, and the bus then sets off. Never do I expect the consequences of those choices. About halfway through the trip, there's a sharp swerve to the right. Now everything is rolling rapidly to the left, and I am along for the ride. The bus has rolled over and now is lying sprawled across a quiet country road. With a surge of panic and adrenaline, I push myself up to try and get out of the bus and get to safety, but I'm stuck. My left hand is pinned to the road by the side of the bus. Now I realise. In those last split seconds, my life has just drastically changed. As pain starts to sink in, one clear question screams into my mind: what on earth do I do now? As the other buses in the convoy arrive at the scene, I begin to hear people entering the wreck. Taking action, they save my life. For me, nothing matters anymore, except the choices I have to make in this moment or in the next 10 seconds to try and stay alive. Simple, small choices. Number 1, focus on my breathing. Breathe in, breathe out, repeat. Number 2, listen to what those around me are telling me to do and try my best to remain calm. My goal is simple: arrive at hospital with a pulse. I figure if I can achieve that, the chances are that I'll live. After nearly 2 hours, trapped in that bus, I'm loaded onto a helicopter and flown to hospital. And thanks to the efforts of so many people, I achieve that first goal. Only to be confronted with a choice that I never thought I'd have to make. As the doctors are preparing me for surgery, they ask me if they can amputate my hand. As the weight of that choice starts to hit home, I look them in the eye and I give them my answer: yes. Emerging from the first surgery, I see my parents by my bedside, and now both my arms heavily covered in bandages, my left arm shorter than my right. And as the anaesthetic wears off, it becomes clear that they've amputated my hand. What isn't so clear is how I'm ever supposed to confront the challenges that now lie in front of me. A few mornings later, I wake up early. My hospital room is dark and quiet, and there's just the beeping of the machines by my bedside. It doesn't stay that way for long. My mind seizes that opportunity to kick into overdrive. What did I do to deserve this? This wasn't part of the plan. My life, my dream, it's over. I'm only 20 years old. What am I supposed to do now? For so much of my life, I've been so focused and driven on my childhood dream of becoming a fighter pilot. I had poured everything into it. And now, stuck in this hospital bed, a dark and painful reality is starting to sink in. They haven't just amputated my hand. They've amputated my dream. I hit rock bottom. I'm filled with uncertainty about what my life is going to look like, and I'm questioning if I will ever achieve anything. Now I'm doing my life with only one hand. In the back of my mind, there's this growing fear and dread that I may never fly again. That little voice in my head is saying all sorts of unhelpful things like, who are you kidding? One-handed people don't fly planes. As sunlight begins to fill the hospital room, thankfully my thinking starts to change. I can't go back. I can't go back and choose a different seat on the bus or stop the bus rolling over. That's history. Likewise, choosing to get angry or frustrated with the driver, well, that won't bring my hand back either. About the only thing I can control is my recovery. And it becomes clear that I have a very simple choice. I can get better or I can get bitter, but I've got to get to work. So my family and I, we turn to the best resource available. We turn to the internet. And Googling away, we find a common and recurring theme: resilience. The Cambridge Dictionary defines resilience as the ability of a substance to return to its usual shape after being bent, stretched, or pressed. And straight away, that sounds like a perfect description of exactly what my left hand has been through, but it will never return to its usual shape. It's gone. So digging deeper, we find the American Psychological Association, which states that psychologists define resilience as the process of adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, threats, or significant sources of stress. Clearly, I need as much resilience as I can get. But to me, that seems like something only other people have. Inspiring people on TV, sports stars, elite athletes, not everyday people like me. Now I'm face to face with this adversity, far greater than I've ever imagined. How am I supposed to be resilient? Thankfully, I've discovered that we don't have to be superheroes or even superhuman to overcome challenges and achieve resilience. In fact, we have a capacity for that already. A key step to being resilient is something that all of us are capable of, making one consistent small choice at a time. I believe that no matter what challenges we face, there's always a choice of some sort. They don't have to be massive choices. They can be small things, like focusing on our breathing, asking for help, or trying whatever tasks are in front of us just one more time. As I come to see my recovery in this way, maybe that's the answer. Maybe my journey back to a somewhat normal life, as scary and as impossible as that seems in this moment, maybe that's just going to be one small choice and action at a time. All of the essential things like learning to shower, to feed myself, to get dressed, through to things like writing, typing, and even texting. Actually, the choices start out even smaller than that. One of the first tasks the doctors set me in my recovery is to fart. And that's a massive perspective shift. Almost overnight, my goals have gone from things like pass my uni exams and learn to fly some of the most technologically advanced aircraft in the world to something as simple as a fart. Talk about small choices. I can safely say that in my life, success and progress has never smelt so bad before, and I hope it never does again. But now my family and I are celebrating that fart like I've just won a gold medal at the Olympics. But it's that one small choice in action that kickstarts my journey to recovery. A few months later, I attend my first prosthetic appointment. And within what seems like minutes, I have a hand like this one sitting on a desk and it's opening and closing as I'm flexing muscles of my residual limb. I feel like the Terminator. I'm almost invincible. I'm going to have two hands again. Anything will now be possible. And in my mind, I'm having all sorts of crazy thoughts like, step aside, Maverick. I'll be flying jets in no time. Not quite. Very quickly, occupational therapy becomes my life. And as I come to learn, it's going to be a lot tougher. My occupational therapist has all sorts of simple and straightforward tasks for me to do. Things like putting pegs in a pegboard, or even simpler yet, picking up a ball. Easy, right? I haven't failed more before in my lifetime. It's like I'm being asked to pick up 1 grain of sand using some sort of high-tech robotic chopsticks that I have absolutely no idea how to use. So often I pick up the ball, then almost get it back to the safety of my right hand before the ball and the prosthetic have other ideas. We all know what it's like to drop the ball from time to time. Things don't always go to plan, and sometimes it's not even our fault. Life throws curveballs at us, setbacks strike, and the next thing you know, you end up like me, standing here, staring at the ball, wondering why it didn't work, and questioning if we're ever going to succeed. But each time I drop that ball, again, I've got another small choice. On one hand, I can let the ball win, throw my hands in the air and just give up, but I don't have that option. If I can't do something as simple as pick up a ball, how am I going to look after myself day to day, let alone chase my goals and my dreams and hopefully return to the air? Or I can bend down, pick up the ball and try again, one more time. Small choices are powerful. That doesn't mean they're easy. I've made my share of bad choices and at times have questioned if my choices are even leading me anywhere. With time and discipline, months of small choices allowed my biggest challenges to become a solid foundation for even bigger and crazier goals. I returned to the air, completed my degree and graduated, achieved my commercial pilot's license, became a flying instructor, and now I'm incredibly lucky. I get to fly aerobatics whenever I get the chance. The other powerful lesson that I've learned through using small choices to achieve resilience is that our situation and our setbacks don't determine our story. Let me give you an example. Prior to the accident, nobody would have considered me an athlete, not even me. I'd begrudgingly get in the swimming pool at the school sports carnival, and despite my best efforts at the athletics, trust me, I wasn't a standout there either. I was never destined to be an athlete. Then, during my recovery, I get given this form to apply for adaptive sporting events, such as the Invictus Games. What an incredible opportunity. I may have lost my hand and my dream in that accident, but now I have this new and exciting avenue that I can explore. Despite the strong story I have in my mind about my own athletic abilities, again, I make a small choice. I fill out the form, submit it, and take a massive step outside my comfort zone. But I'm glad I did. Very quickly, I become immersed in this incredibly diverse yet supportive team. And despite the challenges that my teammates and I face, we're improving ourselves and each other through sport. It's infectious. Those teammates help me to understand the healing power of sport. No matter how chaotic everything in my life is, that simple decision to show up for training is one that I can always control. Every time I go an extra metre or a split second faster, that is a victory. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen every time though. At times, my arm falls off in the middle of a row, yet remains firmly bolted to the handle, trying to smack me in the face as I desperately try to keep rowing. More embarrassingly, I faceplant on a track at a competition in front of spectators just weeks before the Invictus Games. Who would have thought that a bruised ego hurts more than losing a hand? Nursing that bruised ego, and with the help of friends and coaches again, I revert back to small choices. And I focus on every single detail. How do I get into the blocks? Which foot hits the ground first after the starter goes? And more importantly, how do I run this race without falling over? That seems kind of important. Weeks later at the Invictus Games, it's time to put those choices to the test. Walking out onto the track and seeing the stands full of spectators, I can sense my heart starting to beat faster in my chest. As I approach the blocks and crouch down, the nerves start to rise as the race is now set. In seconds, the starter goes and I sense movement to my left and my right as we all explode forward out of the blocks at once and take off down the straight, and the result is something I never expect. Somehow I cross that finish line first. But far more importantly and powerful to me is the fact that I did that without falling over. Those small choices paid off. I owe a lot to small choices. Small choices put me in that seat on that bus and drastically changed my life. Simple, small choices then became the stepping stones to my recovery and my resilience. Consistent, small choices, starting with some breaths, followed by a fart, transformed that tragic accident into some of the most incredible and amazing opportunities I could have ever imagined. And we all have that ability. All of us can make small choices and transform or rewrite our stories. Be it in our personal lives, in our communities, or even in a broader global sense. Not only can we be resilient, but we can all transform our toughest times and our toughest challenges into some of the most greatest opportunities that we can ever expect. And do you want to know what the most exciting and best part about that is? Is that we all start making those choices today. Thank you.
Thank you, Nathan Parker, for that inspirational talk. Next up, we have Luciano Cardelicchio, and he is a university professor at UNSW, and he is going to be talking to us about buildings and the importance of the smaller, finer things in buildings that prove them to be strong and make them last long.
Every time I need to explain the complexity of buildings, I always find that the best way is to compare them with the human bodies. We have skeletons that are helping us standing up, the skin protecting us from the outside threats, and a series of networks, respiratory system, that are helping us functioning every day. Buildings are exactly the same thing. Buildings are very complicated objects. They have the skeleton, the structural frame for standing up. They have the facade to protect and to create the filter between the inside and the outside. And they have the complex series of networks such cables, plumbing systems that provide the functions in order to that building to be used. So if we want to push that concept of comparison with the human body further, let's talk about longevity. What does it mean, longevity for a building? Us, as a human body, we know that extending the life expectancy is about having a well-balanced diet, exercising every day. But what does it mean try to extend the life expectancy for a building? When I was a student in building engineering in Rome, I remember we had these very quirky buildings coming up close to our university, and us as students, it was really, really interesting to go every month and check the progress of it, to really see and to learn from it and to see how this internationally designed building was coming up. After 16 years after the completion of this building, I came back, and I've noticed that the building wasn't aging as gracefully as I thought. A lot of components, they were having accelerated decay, defects, and the age of the building was definitely getting shorter than what was planned. As a researcher, I start asking myself why this is happening. And I just noticed, the first thing I noticed is it wasn't an isolated case. Many buildings around the world experience premature defects, premature decay. So I start really doing a little bit of a research to figure out the reasons why sometimes the life expectancy of the building can be cut too short. So one of the reasons, and probably the most obvious one, is the purpose of the building. As a society, we might experience changes, cultural changes or economic changes that make a specific purpose for a building to not be needed any longer. Just think about what is going to happen to office building after this pandemic. There's been a lot of questions thrown out in saying, do we need office buildings anymore? Like now that we know that we can work from home and keep our productivity at a high standard. So the big question is how we can make sure that what we design today, the office buildings that we design today, they are not going to be demolished. Ending a life premature of a building means that what you're designing, the building that you're designing, it's not flexible. Meaning that the building is not designed to be adaptable to change purpose, and that's why it needs to be demolished. There are also other reasons why the aging pattern and the life expectancy of the building can be cut too short. One, of course, is climate change. It's a completely disregard of climate change when you design a building. Think about all the phenomena that we were seeing in this day and age with climate change really present. Think about the quantity of rainfall that might put a lot of pressure on the drainage system of the building. If your building is not fit for purpose, thinking that the climate is changing, but it will keep changing if we don't do anything about it. So the idea that we are designing something that is not future-proof might really compromise the life of the building. And the other key aspect is not thinking of how we maintain a building. Maintenance design meaning that when I'm designing something, at the same time, I'm thinking how to fix potential failures or how to fix the potential outcome of the aging of the building, and making sure that what we that kind of a fixing is affordable, is in the budget. We are still in the building in Rome next to my university, and that broken glass has been broken for years now. And the reason why it hasn't been replaced is just because it's too expensive to do so. So it's really important to take to understand how to extend life just by embracing maintenance. Why we care, why we should care about the lifespan of a building? Well, of course, it's sustainability. Of course, probably the strongest statement is thinking that the most sustainable buildings are the ones that already exist. So embracing and extending the life of buildings, that means that we can save and reuse a lot of resources that have been already consumed on this planet without demolishing anything. Construction and demolition waste is always one of the highest contributor in the overall waste generated by by countries featuring strong economies. In Australia, for instance, 44% of all the waste we produce is coming from the construction sector. But it's not just about sustainability, I think. Starting embracing the lifespan of a building in terms of what we need to do for the future help us also to understand a bit better the heritage, a bit better of what we have, how to respect what we have. And every time I read about buildings, even not very old buildings, under threats of demolition, I always find this approach of demolishing something old to create something new, consuming and wasting all the resources and the materials in this building to create something new, consuming new resources. I found this approach the outcome of a lack of creativity, really. We know that we can do so much better than that. There's a power of creativity that I can see in my students, and I learn on the job, in my first job in Rome, where I saw engineers, architects, structural engineers, business owners, developers, thinking together to a creative solution in order to extend, embrace the old, and extend the life to project a specific building towards the future. In this case, particularly, it was amazing to see all this professional creating a building able to float, basically, on top of archaeological ruins in Rome. So a new building completely erected under archaeological ruins that in that way could be preserved. That power of creativity that I can see in my students and I saw in that building is already here in Sydney. And there are some cases, very exciting. You know, on one hand, on the left, you see a building in the CBD that's been demolished, a building that represented historical values. A different approach now in the CBD is the tangible outcome of this different approach is on the other example on the right, where the building with an historical value, instead of being demolished, is being extended to create marketable value, so the building life doesn't stop, it just extended. And another interesting one is where despite of the historical value of the building to be preserved, the building components are just saved because they're already resources consumed, and there is no longer, thanks to the power of creativity, to demolish them instead of reusing them. In this case, for instance, half of the structure of this new building comes from the old ones. So I guess the takeaways here is that we need to build however the buildings, however small the buildings we are designing today, we need to make sure that they represent our future heritage. And I cannot wait to see the power of creativity embraced by the future generation of architects.
Thank you, Professor Cardelicchio, for that amazing speech. I don't think I'll be able to walk through cities or look at buildings the same way ever again. Next up, we have a performance from a band with Gerard on the vocals and the guitar, Sohan on the bass guitar, and Ruben on the drums.
Doing the man a favor. And if I talk to my neighbor, it's someone to vote for the paper. Oh, isn't it obscene? Everybody seems to live in a dream. And if I go to church, it's someone about them. I try to search for the truth. They lock me up in a room. Oh, isn't it obscene? Everybody seems to live in a dream. Yeah. Everybody seems to live in a dream. Oh, isn't it obscene? Everybody seems to live in a dream. Whoa, isn't it obscene? Every fucking mother lives in a dream.
thank you to the band for that amazing performance. Next up, we have one of our very own Reddam students, Mia Sison, from our 2022 cohort, and she is going to be speaking to us about the dangers of stigmatizing menstruation.
It's my first ever period and my mother is telling me everything. And I mean everything. Blood, tampons, ovaries, every month? Why did no one ever tell me about menstruation? Why was I never informed about the terror my uterus could wreak? And hang on, do the vending machines in shopping centre bathrooms dispense pads, not forbidden chocolate bars? Even now, saying the word menstruation makes me a little uncomfortable, and I'm forced to ask myself, why? The answer is simple: stigma. But the taboo around periods does not only cause discomfort in those who speak of them, it also holds back many of those who experience them, perpetuating menstrual inequality. And in the face of stigma, just one conversation or tampon, or even just some honesty, no matter how small, can make an incredible difference. This is something that I learned a few years after my revelation, when I became curious about how menstrual stigma affects women all around the world. Were they all as shocked as I was? As girls, my friends and I would fret at the beach, haunted by stories of period-inspired shark attacks, which made Jaws seem tame. Universally, we view periods as gross and dirty, highlighted by these myths which, though absurd, show the intensity of the menstrual taboo. In the developing world, this stigma affects the way women view their entire bodies. In Australia, from September to November last year, 9 out of 10 girls reported experiencing period pains. However, only 50% would seek medical help if experiencing cramps outside of their cycles, showing how women's pain is often invalidated and ignored. Further, this stigma perpetuates period poverty, with 1 in 5 Australian women unable to afford menstrual products. Pads and tampons are rarely available in schools or public bathrooms, disproportionately affecting women living below the poverty line and those in Indigenous communities, as they are forced to ask the questions of, will I stain? Am I leaking? Hindering their ability to properly participate and accelerate in education and employment. And then I wondered, how does menstrual stigma affect women in the developing world? There, unsurprisingly, periods are even more of a taboo topic. In Nepal, women are banished to menstruating huts due to the view that they are impure. In India, 12% of the menstruating population have access to the required products. However, I was even more shocked to discover the effect that this stigma has on girls' education. In Africa, 1 in 10 girls misses school during her period. In India, some 23 million girls drop out of school each year upon beginning menstruation. Something as small as playground teasing or inadequate bathrooms can deeply affect a girl's ability to access education, putting her at greater risk of child marriage and pregnancy, threatening her health, education, employment, and future. But since this stigma is a product of small-mindedness, it can also be solved through small steps. Ultimately, we can start by actually talking about periods. No more on flow. We need to ensure that our girls are prepared and informed about what's happening in their own bodies, and that our boys are educated too, because periods aren't just some girl's issue. On a bigger scale, we can donate to charities like Share the Dignity and Period, because something as small as a box of tampons can provide a woman in need with dignity and security. Also, by just talking about periods, we raise global awareness, and in doing so, we ensure that women in the developing world are having their voices heard, making sure that no woman is left behind. We can also support organizations like the MINA Foundation, who provide girls in schools with menstrual products, and Share the Dignity, who sew reusable pads and liners for women in the developing world to make sure that young women are able to continue their educations, in turn elevating their communities and economies, benefiting everyone. And as a side note, those bathroom vending machines should definitely be free. Oh, and they definitely need to start dispensing chocolate bars.
Thank you, Mia Sison, for that fabulous talk. I would know that a lot of girls are definitely awkward with the topic of periods and menstruation, and honestly, a talk like this is very much needed. Next up, we have Catherine Westwood. She's part of the Dinner Ladies with her business partner, Sophie Gilead, and they have started their business very small, like any small business, and they expanded over the last 13 years, and they honestly have a great menu. I did take a look at it, and it was delicious from what I could see. I would order, but that's up to Mother Goose, unfortunately. Next up, Catherine Westwood.
Hi, my name is Catherine Westwood, and I'm one of the founders of the Dinner Ladies. We started our business some time ago, back in 2007, and I have always been a great believer ever since we started the business that everything that we've done, we've never done a big thing when we've started the business, we've always just done a mountain of small things. After we started the business in 2007, really the reason that we started was just so small. Sophie, my business partner, said to me, I need to buy a birthday present for my husband. I want to buy him a kayak. How am I going to get the money? So we just sort of thought, what are we going to do? Let's have a go at making some money. So we decided to cook 10 dinners, and we delivered them to 10 friends. And we said, next week, if you would like to order, you'll have to part with actual hard-earned cash. Here we are in the shed with our very small first dinner. It was hilarious when I look back on it. In our first week of business, we made $400, which we were absolutely thrilled with. No matter how small, it was our start. The other thing that was really small when we started our business was our profit. It was every single week, it was very small, but we knew no matter how small it was, that if we made a small profit every single week, relentlessly, it would build up into something bigger, a brand, a reputation, our bank balance, everything. So we just kept going, no matter how small. The other small thing that we had to deal with at the time was our children. As you can see here, we have 7 of them. And when we started the business, they were all very, very small. They're not so small anymore. In fact, they are fairly big and fairly ugly now, as you can see, with a few tats between them. But back in the old days when we started, as you can imagine, it was a big thing managing all of those kids. So it was all about operational efficiency. We had 1 day of childcare that we had, and that was our main cooking day. The day before, when the babies were having their nap, was when we used to prep all of our veg and get lots of little jobs done. There's nothing like the ticking time bomb of a sleeping baby to make sure that you work through everything and you get everything done very efficiently. Once we'd got all the food cooked, the next day we had to deliver it. So Sophie would load everything into an esky in the back of a car, and then I would feed and bathe all of the 7 children, which meant that she didn't have to do that when she came home. It was these operational efficiencies and these small ways that we managed our time that meant we were able to keep going. Otherwise, we would have become overwhelmed. And keep going we did. So as you can see, we're now starting to get a bit bigger and making more and more lasagnas. We didn't last in the shed forever. We moved to the Bondi Bowling Club after a while, which had seen better days. After a while of being there, we then moved on into an old butcher's shop, which was, that was the place where we went from being a very small business operating 2 days a week to being a bigger business and being full-time. That's when we really started to make a bit more money and get more money to buy more stuff, like our very first van, which was one of our most thrilling purchases. It was fantastic. The fact that we now were able to operate 5 days a week meant that we were making our small profit was getting just a little bit bigger, and we were making more of it. So eventually we were able to save up and move into our first commercial kitchen. It was fantastic. It was a huge task getting ready for us to move in, but also in many ways it was just a mountain of small tasks. So we just thought, okay, we just need to keep working our way through fixing everything, building the freezer, tidying up this wall, getting all of these jobs done, and eventually we were ready to move in. When we first moved into that place, we only occupied a very small part of the whole kitchen. But eventually, we did more dinners, we cooked more things. Each small thing that we did built into something bigger, and it meant that we were able to slowly fill the kitchen. And now, on this day, I'm happy to say that we've gone from starting very small in the shed to now operating 4 sites in Matraville and delivering to over 5,000 customers every single week across the eastern seaboard, from Brisbane to New South Wales to Victoria and to South Australia. So we have come a long way since our very small start. And I do believe that there was no big thing that we ever did in the course of building this business that was a reason for our success. It was a relentless mountain of small things. We always made sure we picked up the phone. We always made sure we made the food as delicious as it possibly could be. We always made sure that things were shipshape. We always made sure we paid our bills on time. If we couldn't pay our bills on time, we would make sure we'd phone them up and say, I'm really sorry we can't pay this week, but I promise we'll pay then. And we tried to follow through. So it's attention to all the small details and the mountain of stuff that makes up the big picture that what eventually leads to success. So our website is another big reason that we've managed to build this. And this was not, it's a pretty big website now, but we started in a very small way with just a website that didn't really do anything. And the other key thing about our website is that we sell to all of our customers via our website. So what that means for our business is we don't have one enormous customer that we rely on completely. And I'm sure anyone who runs a business will understand that's a really dangerous position to be in. The fact that we have lots and lots and lots of small customers individually gives us, in fact, great power. Because as Sophie likes to say, each customer is so precious, they're like a ruby. And a ruby is a small, precious thing. And every single customer, no matter how small they are individually, they go to make up our entire customer base, which is absolutely everything in a business, and it's vitally important. And some of the things our customers have said to us, even though they're small things, honestly, they still bring a tear to my eye, because they're things like, you've saved our marriage. It's like having my dear departed mother cooking for me again. So it really means a lot. Having lots of individual customers, even though by themselves they're small, together they make up something absolutely extraordinary. And on my final slide that I would like to go to, I would like to say the last thing about small things being fantastic. This is a picture of me and my husband at our daughter's graduation. As you can see, I never thought that I would marry a man who was smaller than me, but no matter how small, he's definitely a keeper. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Catherine Westwood. It honestly is so heartwarming to hear the journey of a small business as they grow. Next up, we have the live Q&A, and if you haven't done so already, you can hand in your questions on the Google form, and the link to the Google form will be in the comments section.
Okay, welcome to our first Q&A session. You all must be very curious, so let's just jump in and start. We're going to ask some questions, so I hope you're all ready. So our first question is to Mia. So Mia, do you think periods should also be a larger part of the school curriculum? I know the person who asked the question says they know most of the information regarding periods has been learnt from female friends rather than in a school environment. Do you think if it were implemented into the curriculum, would it help normalize menstruation?
100%. I think that it's really important that we actually start to address this as an actual part of our health education because of the fact that it is simply a biological process and needs to be treated as such. And so by actually treating it as an aspect of our school education, we're immediately destigmatizing it because we're treating it in the same way that we treat every process from like cellular respiration to digestion. And it's also really important that we make sure that both boys and girls are educated on this topic. And when considering the fact that often when we learn about menstruation from our peers, it's only from girls, we're actually excluding boys and male students from learning about this topic as well, simply because they're not included in these conversations. So yes, 100%. A key part of this stigma is actually introducing it into school curriculums and making sure that it is treated just as it is, as a vital bodily process and not something that is taboo and only reserved for girl conversations.
Thank you, Mia. Yes, I do agree with that, by the way, because it is true. Second question is to Catherine. So, do you believe, or what do you believe is the best way to start a business and come up with an idea? Entering the large world of business has always seemed like a scary idea. What steps are necessary to begin legally?
Virtually nothing, just start. It's a lot of people feel intimidated and think, oh, it's all too complicated, I can't possibly do it. Just start, and that's the only way to do it. Because if you actually try and consider every single thing that you need to do and that might go wrong, you'll never start. So just start, and you'll probably stuff up. You might get thrown in jail, probably not, but you just need to start and try and figure out every single thing as you go. But don't think it's not impossible. Anyone can do it, but you just need to think, okay, today I'm going to do it. When I started, I did sort of think, you know, someone needs to tell me how to run a business. Someone needs to tell me what to do. No one will tell you. You just have to say, right, I'm going to do this. I'm going to start selling something. I'm just going to start. That's all. Don't overthink it.
So by that, you kind of just mean like start small, reach out to friends like you mentioned in your talk, and like.
Absolutely. So if you're going to make something, for example, then just start making it and then sell it in any way you possibly can. Build a website, get a stall at a market. If you're wanting to sell your lawn mowing services, just start. Just go and put leaflets around in a letterbox. If you're a graphic designer and you want to set up your own business, just start. Tell people, I'm a graphic designer. Can I have a job? Just start. You need to get an ABN. That's probably the only thing you need to do. And then the tax office will then tell you what you need to do. So, yes.
Okay, perfect. So to all the viewers watching, by the way, we've got a quick break to just say that in order to submit your questions, there is a Google form link in the description box, and it's also on the TedxYouth@ReddamHouse.com website. So please be sure to put your questions in, submit them, and yeah, we're going to try our best to get through all of them. So next question, that's going to be to Nathan Parker. So Nathan, how did losing an arm affect your balance?
That's a very good question. My balance hasn't changed all that much, which is pretty good. One of my biggest concerns when I first went to the Invictus Games, I decided to try swimming. And my biggest concern was I wouldn't be able to go in a straight line and just swim around in circles. But thankfully, that wasn't the case either. I was able to follow the black line and thankfully get from one end of the pool to the other without drinking all the pool water.
Thank you. Another question for Nathan. Are you still actively doing any sports?
Very good question. So I'm lucky enough to still participate. I do some running every now and then, mainly just general fitness stuff. For me, my new goals are to pursue competition aerobatics. So I want to try and pursue that high performance aerobatics as my sport going forward, but also doing whatever I can to keep fit in between as well.
Perfect, thank you. We have another question for Mia. So Mia, how do you recommend increasing education on menstruation?
As I said before, I think it's definitely important that we start including it in the school curriculum. I also think that it's actually important that we just, as a society, have this conversation, because one of the key aspects, as I spoke about in the stigma and also just about menstrual education in general, is the fact that it just has to be a conversation that we have, and we need to stop treating it as though it's some sort of alien topic to other health, like it's something entirely separate, because that in turn actually prevents girls from seeking help around menstruation and getting that education. So simply by talking about it and ensuring that our daughters and our sons as well are informed, we're also encouraging people in general to actually get that scientific information, which gives it a step up, which is of course a very important aspect of it as well, since it is a health issue, not something else, not some sort of like magical experience.
Perfect, yeah. And our next question is also for Catherine. Well, not also, but Catherine, do you mind elaborating on the legal requirements like the ABN and such?
Sure. So to get an ABN, it's a really simple process. So you just need to, I don't know, Google, how do I get an ABN? I think back in my day, you had to go and fill out a form at the post office. I'm pretty sure you wouldn't have to do that anymore. So you just get an ABN, and that's a very simple thing. Anyone at all can get an ABN. And once you've got the ABN, the first thing that will happen after that is the tax office will invite you along to a seminar about how to pay your taxes, because there are just certain things you need to do. So every quarter you need to submit a business activity statement. But the tax office, because they want you to pay tax, they're quite good at getting onto you and telling you exactly what you need to do. But that's just get an ABN, and then start doing whatever you need to do, and go to the tax office talks, and just, at any point, just figure out what you need to do. It's so easy now with Google. You can literally Google anything at all. And the other thing that I did when we first started this business was I went along and did a basic bookkeeping course. Because that's also very important. When you start a business, you have got to manage your money. It's very important. Lots of people sort of think, oh, well, I just want to do what I do, and that's all really great, and I'm sure the money will take care of itself. It doesn't. You need to just look after your money and just learn the basics about accounting and bookkeeping, and pay your taxes. That's the other thing you've got to do.
Thank you, Catherine. Unfortunately, Luciano can't be joining us today, and so we can't ask him any questions, but yeah. But Nathan, your question will be the last one for this Q&A session, because unfortunately we're running out of time for the session. And what was the research like for your arm at the time, and has it improved?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think I often say to people that if you're going to be an amputee, now is the best time to do it. Even day by day, the technology is just getting better and better, and they're constantly coming out with new technology. For me, I'm very lucky to have probably the upper echelons of what's commercially available at the moment, which I'm very fortunate to have. But I know there's a number of exciting projects on the timelines in laboratories over in the United States and various other places around the world that we'll see even things like sense of touch in prosthetic hands, as well as more dexterity. So I'm really excited to see where the future goes, and who knows, if everyone just keeps chipping away with small changes and small improvements, who knows what the technology will look like in 5 or 10 years' time.
Thank you, Nathan. And yeah, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this first Q&A, but there will be a second one closer to the end of this event. So remember to keep submitting the questions. There is the link in the description box of the live stream. Just click on that. It's a Google form. Submit your questions. Or go to the TedxYouth @ReddamHouse website. Thank you.
Next up, we have Victor Zhu, and he is also part of our ReddamHouse 2022 cohort. And if you watched the recent school musicals, you would have seen Beauty and the Beast, where he played the Foo and did a great job. It was honestly one of the best musicals I have ever watched. So Victor Zhu will be talking about the smaller things in life, what makes us leave our legacies. Victor Zhu.
Hello, I'm Victor. If you didn't read my biography for this TEDx event, I'm 16 and I am notoriously remembered for, well, nothing, really. I haven't had a big accomplishment like my fellow speakers. I think the closest I have to an achievement like theirs is being the most improved player on my basketball team in year 9. So I came to a conclusion that I can't and haven't really done much and can't do much to do anything really compared to these freak athletes on my team, compared to these world-changing speakers with whom I share this stage with. So what is the point? What can I do? What will be remembered of me? What is my legacy? So, like any usual teenager would, I Googled legacy to find out more, and of course, I didn't find my answer. Instead, I found a TV show called, guess, Legacies, which you can watch on Binge. That wasn't very helpful, and I still didn't have an answer to my question, the motivation to life or what I wanted to do. I can't change the world drastically. It's almost impossible for me to do everything or anything that'll help change society, that'll end wars and famine and poverty. So what is the point? It's impossible for me to do these things. On the topic of legacy, I just want to quickly list off some bad ones. Number 1, COVID-19. Number 2, Galileo to the 1600s society. And number 3, my basketball career. A good legacy, however, is Galileo's. His legacy is as the father of astronomy and physics. But back then, his legacy was disregarded and only known for defying the heliocentric system. If you told Galileo that centuries after his death that humans had traveled to the moon and used his work on astronomy, he'd probably say you're crazy. I assume he'd say that because, well, first, he's dead, and second, I don't speak Italian. But even so, it just shows how subjective legacy can be to each individual. We see Galileo as a pioneer of science, but back then, he was a failure, even when he was right. Galileo's big discoveries that we acknowledge today were minuscule and worthless back then. So that's why size doesn't matter. With billions of people living on planet Earth and all those that have passed, my legacy is worthless. In time, I will be forgotten. So what is the point? I mean, I'll never be the sexiest man of the year, so I'll never have these big achievements that'll solidify me in history. My dad is driving me to a basketball game through traffic. You know how traffic is. And as I was looking around at the cars, I noticed. You ever get that thing where you see a stranger and they see you and you guys make eye contact, but it's awkward, so you guys look away, but then you look back and then they look back and it's still awkward, and so you still look away? Well, that didn't happen. But as I was looking at these cars, I noticed P-platers packed with young adults, lone drivers, JDM fanatics, family SUVs with children and tired parents. I realized then that I would never see these people again. I would never hear their stories, and they would never see me again. I was so lonely in such a big world, so what is the point? I needed to change my perspective. Sure, my legacy won't be remembered for millennia to come, but what can I do that'll make a change? What can I do that'll make a difference in my life and the life of others? Well, legacy is subjective, as you can see through Galileo. So, what does it mean to me? I find that living in the moment is crucial. Being there for others and helping them by making them happy. It's fulfilling to be there for anyone. A friend, a family, even a stranger on the street. I was at a camp. There's a beautiful starry night. No light pollution, just stars. My friends and I, we lay down on the grass, it's kind of wet, and we talk. We laugh, we sing, we dance, stargazing. We are so incredibly small in the grand scheme of things. It was almost pointless of an experience that wouldn't have been remembered for decades to come. But at that moment, I felt at ease. It's the moments that we take for granted, which are the moments we should truly appreciate. These small experiences, which are pushed aside for a bigger purpose or goal, they're the special moments that define a legacy. These big goals and achievements, they're not the only things in life. I mean, yes, they're important, but overall, you need to just live in the moment. Take in these experiences, be present. That's what's truly fulfilling. It's by taking these small steps, we connect with others. It can be as basic as watching the starry night, having meaningful and meaningless conversations, listening to a friend and just being there for them, or even helping mum with groceries. They're not big things, these small actions, but they mean something to someone, even if you don't realize it. Rather than trying to accomplish big moments, achievements that'll secure your legacy, why not consider the smaller actions? It's impossible for me to achieve everything. I mean, some things might only be a dream or a thought, but it's by taking action, big or small, that makes the future. Because the future is not created without action. So I want to reiterate my previous statement. Size doesn't matter. As you've hopefully gathered, life isn't about the big things. It can be and should be, but overall, it's the small moments that take place within a lifetime that are important. I mean, we only have a limited amount of large, celebratory experiences of our own, so it's important to give appreciation to the smaller moments because your identity is shaped by them. The good, the bad, and the ugly. I mean, I'm not saying that working hard for a promotion or a good mark is not important. It is. But I also want you to realize that these experiences that we take for granted are the experiences that define a legacy. It's by taking these smaller steps and actions. It's by building on them. It's by taking one step at a time that eventually you'll begin to wonder what else is possible and how else you can spread your impact to more and more people. I started playing basketball in year 8. It took me a year and a half to finally score my first points. It took 1.5 years of training, of practice, of just building my courage, and it finally happened. 3 points. I am Stephen Curry! Well, not yet, but it's possible. Ultimately, it's not about the size that counts. It's what you do with it that matters more. For the sword is not determined by its length, but by the skill of the wielder.
Thank you to Victor. He is honestly such a relatable person because I'm sure a lot of us would have that same feeling of not feeling like we've done enough in our lives. Next up, we have Jahin Tanvir, and he will be talking to us about how racism made him stronger with his own personal experiences.
The greatest discovery that we can make is after we've lost our identity. That small piece of wisdom is what I learnt at the age of 7 years old. I was in the school sickbay, my right arm completely wrapped in band-aids. Now I didn't fall over, I wasn't involved in a scuffle, nor was it a sporting injury. What happened was that a fellow classmate of mine decided to draw with a pen on my skin and utter the words, "Your skin looks as dirty as the black ink." It felt like I was suffocating in my own body. I remember rushing back home, standing in front of the mirror, tears streaming down my cheeks. In that moment, I knew of two things. One, that I look like an absolute wuss when I cry. And two, and more importantly, I never wanted to feel the way I was feeling in that moment ever again. My name is Jahin Tanvir. I recently turned 21 years old, and my ambition in life is to be a torchbearer. As a first-generation migrant born in Dhaka, Bangladesh, I've had instances growing up in this country where I felt very confused. Am I going to fit in? Will I ever make it like the others? Does my voice even matter? But that young migrant had people to support him, and here I am today. I want to use my lived experience with racism and discrimination as a vehicle to highlight that your lived experience is powerful enough to make others resonate with your story. That our collective struggle can catalyze concrete change. That if you have an idea or identity worth spreading, you're old enough to speak it to truth. Now, when I think back to the time when I felt so disconnected with the world around me, I realized that the crux of my dissatisfaction wasn't necessarily because of the insults or abuse. I mean, as a kid, it did hurt a lot, trust me. When I think more deeply into it, I realized that I was challenged more so by the confusion that I felt. You see, I moved to Sydney, Australia from Dhaka, Bangladesh in the early 2000s with my parents. I started my schooling in Australia, and that's all I knew. We would go back to Bangladesh every 2-3 years for a few weeks, and that was my only exposure to my motherland. So as you can tell, I didn't really have a strong connection with Bangladesh. In Australia, I learned the language, paradigms, culture from scratch. And so I thought this was my world, my bubble. This is my everything, because I was so overwhelmingly immersed into it. However, when it came to how I was treated, I was singled out because of the color of my skin and because I looked Bangladeshi. So get this, I didn't fit into the Australian culture because of how I looked, and I definitely didn't fit into the Bangladeshi culture because of my time away and learning of the Western culture. So my question is, where do I go? And that is the identity crisis that many young people of color face to this very day. The dichotomy of being from 2 or more different countries, but not fitting into either one. The notion that we are systematically designed to feel different and foreign by intersectional factors we have no control over. And that is affecting young people of color in more ways than we acknowledge. In Australia, 1 in 5 school students face racism every single day. On a national survey of more than 2,000 people, research found that 82% of Asian Australians face racism and discrimination from their workplace and educational institutions. In the same research, 81% of Australians from Middle Eastern backgrounds reported the same, and 71% of Indigenous Australians reported the same. These statistics are shocking, but unsurprising. Now, when it came back to my situation and how I felt, I wasn't openly identifying as a Bangladeshi at school. If anything, I thought I was similar to all my peers. They liked cricket, I liked cricket. They watched the same shows after school that I watched after school. They went to the same classes that I was sitting in right next to them. And so I was confused as to where this racism was coming from. I wanted so desperately for them to see me as them. I wanted so desperately for them to feel comfortable with who I am. I wanted a sip of that acceptance. I wanted desperately to fit into the mold that they were made of. But the danger that I was falling into was that I was losing myself and all the sacrifices that my immigrant parents made in the process. Here I am, losing it all in the fickle process of temporary validation. And that needed to stop. I was very unhappy. And that's when I came across a 3-word principle that my younger self created, and over the years, through my adolescence and adulthood, enhanced. A 3-word principle that I call my triple C's. And my triple C's are anything that I come to whenever I feel that my identity is being challenged, whenever I feel somebody might be attacking me for who I am, and to this very day, I come back to these triple C's. Why I want to share this with you is because I want young people of color, or anyone from any multicultural background, to have the foundations, tools, and moment-by-moment practices to use anytime that they feel that they are being inflicted with racism or discrimination. I want them to feel equipped, just like they would with any other issue. So the triple C's. The first C is called courage. And courage to me is one of the most important traits that we can spend time in investing. Courage by definition is doing anything that's out of our comfort zone, anything that scares us. And what scares us? Change scares us because we have an inertia against doing new things. Conflict scares us because we overthink situations and what might go wrong. But to overcome any adversity, especially racism or discrimination, we need to have the courage to speak up. To look at the lack of representation and say, hey, if no one else is saying anything, why can't I be the first? The courage to overcome the darkness and be a torchbearer. The second C is consistency. And when I talk about consistency, I don't mean it in the sense of doing the same thing over and over again. When I talk about consistency, I mean doing the same thing over and over again, but also understanding how that makes you feel and what you can do to improve it. Consistency not by repetition, but by the ongoing discovery of understanding what something makes you feel and what you want instead of that. To be consistent is to be firm in your values, but it also goes the other way. To consistently stand up for other people. Because we all know how it feels to be discriminated, attacked, or challenged. Why would we want someone else to feel the same way? And finally, the third C that I came across was communication. To communicate is to openly acknowledge who you are, but also acknowledge where you come from, all the emotional turmoil, all the struggles, everything that made your identity where it is right now. To communicate unapologetically about your identity, about your values, and what you stand for. And also, it goes the other way, to communicate whenever someone else is being challenged. Because we don't want this trend of racism to continue and exacerbate. We need to stop it from becoming a culture. And we can't do that if you remain silent. To communicate is to speak up. And ultimately, inside of all of this, the main lesson that I learned is it doesn't matter the color of your skin, or where you come from, or the language that you speak, or what you look like. Your diversity is a superpower. We need to consistently initiate dialogues about racism and discrimination. We need to have the courage to get over the awkwardness and fear of the topic. And most importantly, we need to communicate and have a back and forth dialogue about solutions and counteracting them. It's not going to be pretty, and to be frank with you, I don't think it ever will be when it comes to this subject matter. But this needs to happen. This conversation matters. because there are millions of young people of color right now suffering from this who need it to matter. I want to commit to an Australia and a world where young people feel empowered by who they are, never limited. For them to look at themselves in the mirror and instead of saying, "Why am I so different?" to instead look at themselves in the mirror and say, "I am different, and here's what I will contribute to the world." Thank you.
Thank you, Jahin, and I'm sure we all learnt something valuable from it, and I'm sure none of us will forget our triple Cs. Next up, we have another performance by the same band that you heard earlier, and they will be great yet again. Next up, we have Victor Zhu, and he is also part of our ReddamHouse 2022 cohort. And if you watched the recent school musicals, you would have seen Beauty and the Beast, where he played the Fu and did a great job. It was honestly one of the best musicals I have ever watched. So Victor Zhu will be talking about the smaller things in life, what makes us leave our legacies. Victor Zhu.
Around, living in sound. I'm not bound, 'cause I'm profound. I've got a tune on repeat, stuck in my head, and it's not going till I say the things I want to say. She's always around, living in sound. I'm not bound, 'cause I'm profound. She's always around, living in sound. I'm not bound, 'cause I'm profound. Living in sound. I'm not bound, 'cause I'm profound. I feel that happiness is a product of suffering, until we realize that we're not forever. Just each other, so stop loving just yourself. Love a little what you know and live a little. Stop living on your own. Live a little.
Thank you to the band for that yet again an amazing performance. Next up, we have Professor Martin Green, and he will be talking to us about tiny solar cells scaled into solar panels and how these have made electricity so cheap in history.
Well, hello. I'm Martin Green from UNSW Sydney, and today I'd like to talk to you on the topic of no matter how small, just how those solar cells that I'm holding in the photo below, really very small, how they're having an enormous impact in the fight against climate change. Incidentally, those cells were our last entry in a long-standing record. So we held the record for silicon solar cell performance at UNSW for 30 of the last 38 years, and this was the last chapter in that sustained record period. So to understand how a solar cell works, we have to go back to Albert Einstein, and he was the one that realized that you had to regard light in some contexts as if it was a little particle. And so you can regard the sun, after Einstein, as shooting little projectiles at you, these photons. And the photons have different colors. So the violet ones are the really energetic ones, and they give you sunburn and everything, and the red ones are the less energetic ones. But that was, impossible to understand solar cells without the photon concept. And Einstein's work, also led to the development of quantum mechanics, a fairly indirect route, but it was triggered by his work on quantization of light. And quantum mechanics is essential to understand the other part of the solar cell, which is the semiconductor silicon that's used in the solar cell itself. So this just shows the basic operation. The sunlight, or the photons, are shot into the cell, and what they do there is they excite electrons within the silicon material up to excited states. And the solar cell is designed so that all these electrons move off in the same direction. So if you connect an electrical load between the front and the back contacts to the solar cell, you'll get an electrical current flowing through it. So the solar cell is just really a photon converter. It converts a photon ideally to one electron that flows through that electrical load. And the operation is very simple, just photons in, electrons out. But the underlying physics took people like Albert Einstein to develop the understanding that allows us to design these things. So simple to use, but quite sophisticated in the underlying technology. The solar cells I was holding were quite small. The commercial ones are a little bit bigger. So for a long time, they were 156 millimetre square, 6 inches in the old units. But more recently, gone to bigger wafer sizes, up to 210 millimetre square or 8-inch square. And on the right there is just someone holding a couple of 8-inch and 6-inch wafers, just giving a better idea of the size. But still quite small, very much human-scaled technology. The cells aren't used bare like that. They're packaged into what's called a solar module, and this just shows some typical modules. You have a glass cover sheet and everything's nicely packaged in that with electrical leads coming out to provide the electrical connection. But the modules have been getting bigger too. So that gentleman there is 6 foot tall. So some of them are getting quite large, it's up to 3 square meters in area. The beauty of the solar cell is it can be used in systems that are either very small or very large. So on the left there is a very small application in a solar-powered watch. So and on the right is very large one, a large powered station in Egypt near the Aswan Dam. Looks more interesting from the ground, as you can see in the inserted photo there. But that system is one of the world's biggest solar at the moment. It's 1.7 gigawatts. So that's the size of a fairly average coal-fired or nuclear power plant. So, about half the Australian coal plant are half smaller than that. The other half are bigger. But this year, there'll be about 100 times that amount of solar installed worldwide. So that just represents the size there, a small fraction of the total manufacturing capacity that's being made at the moment. That 190 gigawatts that's being made this year is about 33% more than last year. So the industry grew 33% in that year. If it keeps growing at about 25% a year, somewhat a little bit slower, over the next decade, we'll get to 1,000 gigawatts a year. Or another way of saying that is 1 terawatt of photovoltaics a year manufacturing. And that's really very important, as I'll explain a little bit later on. The really big thing that's happened with solar over the last 10 years or so is a huge reduction in price. And this graph here just shows that, 24 times reduction in 12 years. This just shows the wholesale price in large quantities and so on. But the large modules there beside the gentleman are really 2.4 metres tall, or about 8 feet. And they are about 700 watts rating. So in 2008, they would have cost $2,800 each at the wholesale level. But now they're just over 100. So, that just gives you an idea of the enormity of the difference. So something that was really very expensive now becomes very affordable. And that's really opened up enormous new opportunities for solar in large-scale applications. Australians played a big role in these cost reductions in two different ways. The gentleman, so encircled there, Zhengrong Shi, he was one of my PhD students. He's largely to blame for these cost reductions in that he was born in China but an Australian citizen now, but he was fired with the ambition of establishing solar manufacturing in China back at the turn of the century when absolutely nothing was happening in that area in China. And he was very successful. This is the opening of his first factory, and I got to help him cut the ribbon, fairly heavy lifting. And that factory was a huge success. And he was doing quite well just selling the product. But then he had an even better idea. He decided to list on the New York Stock Exchange, as shown in the photo on the right there, up the top. So he was the first private Chinese company to list on the New York Stock Exchange, and it was a huge success. It was the biggest technology float of 2005, the year that he listed. And that was great for Zhengrong, but the other thing it did was triggered interest in a host of other people in following Zhengrong's footsteps, particularly other students within my group. And so many of these founded other companies in China to do the same thing that Zhengrong had done. And, there was plenty of interest from US investment banks and so on in getting them onto the exchanges, seeing Zhengrong had done well with his company. So there was a flood of companies between 2005 and the global financial crisis listing on the different exchanges. And they were companies that were either founded by my students or had my students in senior positions. So many were formed as Chinese-Australian joint ventures with my students involved. So the competition between these companies that were well cashed up from US investment in a limited market, sort of the only way out is to reduce your costs to try and maintain market share. So that caused very dramatic reduction in costs from 2008 to 2012. That's shown by the arrow there. So that was an Australian-led charge. And the second phase, more recent phase, also Australian-led. The actual underpinning of it happened a little bit earlier, and this is a photo in 1985 of my team, and many of the people in that photo actually went on to partake in that Chinese adventure at the turn of the century. But we were working on high-efficiency cells, and as I said, we held the world record for 30 of the last 38 years. And this was a team that developed what's called the PERC cell. So any manufacturer now will sell you a PERC cell because 90% of the world production is now PERC. But PERC caused this second cost reduction after 2016 because of its higher performance and other very favourable features. So a second Australian initiative that has resulted in low costs. So climate change has been described as the biggest challenge that humanity has ever faced. And these tiny solar cells are positioned to play a great role in that. And this just sort of explains how. So this is a graph that I first saw in 2015, but it's just showing CO2 emissions in gigatons per year up to 2014, and then one of these projections that shows you what you need to do to maintain global temperature rise to something manageable, hopefully, of 2 degrees or less. And when I saw this, it looked pretty hopeless because if you look at the bottom, those coloured regions just show what's expected in the way of emissions from the 4 biggest emitters, even taking into account their best efforts to control things. So you can see that by the end of the decade, we'd be running into a problem in that the whole budget would be using by these 4, notwithstanding the 200 plus other countries in the world whose emissions you had to take into account. But with the recent progress in photovoltaics and the strong uptake and so on, the situation has changed a little bit. And those 3 arrows up at the right, the red ones, just sort of show the effect of 1 terawatt a year installation of photovoltaics if it's displacing coal from electricity production or oil from transport, which are 2 of the biggest emitters. So you can see that year after year, if you install 1 terawatt, it puts you on the right trajectory to follow that 2-degree trajectory, providing everything else can be kept under control. So that's the way these tiny cells are positioned to play a big role in climate change mitigation. So, I was the only one talking about this at one stage, but it's really great to see that even the more conservative parts of the energy industry are now getting on board. So the International Energy Agency has long been very sceptical of the role that solar and other renewables can play in the future. But they've changed their tune recently, thank goodness. And this is their most recent roadmap, which is very heavily solar-based. So they point out that solar now provides the cheapest electricity in history, with that 24 times cost I mentioned before, cost reduction. And they're projecting as part of their roadmap, their strategy is to make the 2020s a decade of massive installation of clean energy, particularly solar. So growing solar capacity to 5 terawatts by 2030, which is roughly in line with that 1 terawatt a year by the end of that decade I previously mentioned. So I guess the moral of the talk, no matter how small, these smaller solar cells have contributed to providing a very potent weapon in addressing climate change in 2 separate ways. So, by training the people who then had the confidence to set up industries in what for many of us is a foreign land, that was one thing. And then the actual technology developed as part of that activity itself has led to its own contribution to cost reduction. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Martin Green, and I'm sure that next time somebody asks me what I want to be when I grow up, I will reply, I want to be a homeowner with solar panels on my roof. Next up, we have Manasi Patil, and she has published 2 books before the age of 15, and she will be talking to us about the literary potential of youth.
There I am, staring at my father's laptop screen, and I have no idea how to feel. I'm happy, I'm excited, and I also feel like sitting in a corner somewhere. Because there I am looking at Amazon.com at the sales page of my first published book. And it's insane. Hold your horses. What is just happening here? Is this even real? If I hit refresh, will all of it just disappear? If someone told me 2 months ago, Manasi, you've got what it takes, just write a book, I would laugh at how ridiculous this feels. And yet there I was, weeks prior, with this strange and tremendous urge to write, to get my ideas out. And being the person I am, I tell myself I have to do this. I grab a notebook and a pen and I start scribbling. As I start writing, the story starts to take shape in my head. And it feels like I'm on this weird and wonderful journey, having no idea where the path leads. I'm kind of scared, but mainly I am excited to see where it's going to take me. As time passes, I have my first draft ready. And I know nothing about publishing. And also, I realize I haven't told anyone about it just for the fact that I have been avoiding disappointment in case it all fails. And I wonder, what if that doesn't really matter as long as I've put my best foot forward? And there I am, confused, gripping my head, frustrated because no one around me knows a thing about self-publishing. The internet became my ultimate source. But step by step, things started to take shape. And seeing the finished product, seeing my book available for purchase, available for people to read it, it just makes me emotional and I feel so very on top of the world. I feel like I can do anything. And I realized that what for me before would have seemed like this incredibly impossible task, like why would I even do it task, actually turned out to be a staircase journey. Taking a step by step, action by action, moment by moment, writing down the words, figuring out what's next, and really, what if the saying, one bite at a time, what if this is what it actually looks like? What if anything is possible? You see, there will be these moments in our lives when we have no idea how to step ahead. When we want to fly, but we just don't know how. When it seems like we are in this environment of darkness, there's no cloudy, no vision, no sense of what to do next. But what if during these moments of darkness, we can be our own guiding light? What if all it takes is looking to see what that next step is going to be? And then the next, and the next. The world we are in right now, it gives us access to information, resources, expertise. There's just knowledge out there. But it hasn't changed the fact that no doubt, uncertainty. Am I going to do this? Or if I'm doing this, I'm not going to tell anyone until it's done. These are the things that make us human. And they don't stop you. They never do. And what I want to tell you is, hey, just go for it. You can be your own guiding light. And you know what it takes? Just one step at a time. What if all of your friends got to discover this? Or the people you care about? Or the people out there to make a difference in the world? What if they all got that they could just take one step at a time? Wouldn't that just be amazingly powerful? And I realized that, yeah, this is what I want to share with people. With my generation, the resilient Gen Z. Back then, the 14-year-old me had the same lack of resources, the same lack of understanding. But you know what I did? I asked myself, what action can I take? What one small step can I take? And you know the cool thing? That's when the change began. Since writing my first book, I've published my second book. I've joined a leading newspaper as a columnist. I've spoken at some global events as a panelist, a keynote speaker. I've organized events and workshops. I've collaborated with leaders and change makers across the globe and so much more. And you know when it all started? Just me backing my instinct and tackling one step at a time. I realized that there will be these moments in our lives when we want to create an illuminated path, but we are ourselves in the darkness. I discovered that during these moments, I can be my own guiding light. And if I can be, what if anyone can be? What if every one of us has this spark, a burn, a light in ourselves, and all we need to do is chase it till we hold it? For myself, I discovered that I can grab that light. I can chase it down. And chasing it down is what I've been doing. When you have no guiding light, you can be your own candle. You can light your own way. You can stand on that way and stride your way. Just carve your own way. And that candle, the one which springs from within you, that one will never extinguish. Thank you.
Thank you, Manasi, and I do remember when I first met Manasi. She told us about her experiences with publishing a book and her overwhelming emotions, and it was really wholesome. And I do really want to thank her yet again because she has managed to submit her video of her talk all the way from India. So thank you for managing to participate in this event despite the distance. Next up, we have our last and final Q&A, and I hope you've all written down your questions and are ready to submit them so that we can discuss them soon.
Solar and storage are very, very closely linked. So up till now, solar has penetrated, the grid fairly substantially, like about 10% of Australian electricity now comes from solar. But that's not very much compared to what it needs to do to have a big impact on climate change. So storage is the other part of the equation that's needed because, of course, the sun doesn't shine at night and you need electricity at night, although we do use most of it in the daytime. So in the past, we've had things like off-peak hot water heating to allow the coal generators to run through the night. They'd rather stop at the night when there's not much demand, but to help them along, we've had off-peak hot water heating. So we need to do things like that in the daytime to make full use of the solar that's available. And then we need batteries, just generally for short-term storage. So we get plenty of sun at midday, but by 6 p.m., particularly in winter, it's starting to disappear. So with batteries, you could store the electricity for that period. And then the other way that's being explored and efforts are being made to fully exploit here in Australia is using pumped hydro storage. So this was largely developed for nuclear energy because it needed to run continuously through the night. But pumping water uphill in the nighttime with the nuclear and then letting it run downhill in the daytime when you needed electricity was the way that storage was provided for nuclear. But that type of approach also works for solar, but you pump water uphill in the daytime. And the advantage of pumping water is that you can store it for longer periods. It's cheaper to store for longer periods than battery storage would be. And then the third big hope is hydrogen. So plenty of interest in the hydrogen economy. So using solar to break water down into hydrogen and oxygen and then storing the hydrogen, and that provides really long-term storage, seasonal storage or annual storage. But it also provides a fuel for things like aircraft where electricity might improve all that suitable, particularly for long distance trips. So thanks for the question.
So apparently there has been a little bit of a tech issue. The start of the question was muted on the live stream. So the question was, where do you see solar power going from here? And do you expect power storage to progress at a similar rate so that we can go 100% solar? And that's what Professor Martin Green was touching on. Thankfully, most of the answer was not muted. But Professor, is it okay if you could just repeat the start of your question? Not the start of the question, the start of your answer.
Okay, I'll have a go. See how good my memory is. Yeah, I think, up till now, solar is providing, a reasonable amount of our electricity. I think it'll be about 12% of Australian electricity this year. But still, it's to have a big impact upon climate change, it's got to provide a lot more than that. It's got to provide, not only our electricity, but our energy for other industrial processes and so on. So solar and storage go hand in hand in meeting those larger fractions of the total power demand. So the three types of storage, there's battery storage, which is really good for short-term storage, say from midday to the evening, when the sun's starting to disappear, but you still need plenty of electricity. And then you have pumped hydro storage, such as the Snowy Hydro scheme, which is good for longer term storage, sort of week-long storage, that kind of thing. And then you have hydrogen, which is really good for seasonal and annual storage, as well as for providing power for things like aircraft, where electricity alone mightn't do the job, particularly on long hauls. So I think that catches the crux of my answer.
Thank you, Professor. Next question is for Victor. So, Victor, why are you pessimistic about being the sexiest man of the year?
Well, I'm only 16 right now. There's a lot of time to grow and develop. Right now, I don't think it's a title that I can really claim as my own. I think it's rightfully someone else's. So maybe in the future, but who knows? Maybe it'll be the Hinds or Martin.
Thank you, Victor. There is definitely potential in all of us. Next question is for Jahin. What do you say is the best method to talk about racism in conversations? As we can all agree, this is not a light topic.
Well, I think the best approach is just to be as honest as possible. I think the main, obstacle that we have is we always try to sugarcoat it. We try to deviate away from the realities of the situation. We try to say, hey, can we please talk about this? Or is it even there? Instead of just, beating around the bush, actually saying, hey, this is something that's been going on for many, many years now, centuries, decades, whatever. Let's have a conversation. Let's have a back and forth dialogue. We're not here to argue with each other. We all have different values, but this is something that's affecting people. So just having a very honest back and forth dialogue, I think is the best way to go, ensuring that we understand the reality of the situation, that this is something that exists, this is affecting people, and approaching in that manner, being compassionate, being understanding, but at the same time, looking for solutions as well. It's a very real topic, like you said, it's very sensitive, but it needs to happen. So being as honest as possible instead of beating around the bush.
Thank you, Jahin. And so the next question will be for Victor again. People are very curious. Victor, who is your favorite basketball player?
That's a tough question. Currently, in the current era, I must say it'll have to be Anthony Edwards. It's his second year in the NBA. I think he has a lot of potential, and some of the players from my favorite team, the Timberwolves. So yeah.
Thank you, Victor. And so the next question is for Martin Green again. Is Australia lagging behind other global in terms of renewable energy? If so, why?
Yes, we're lagging behind in terms of our political commitment to renewable energy at the federal level. And that's just all politics to do with that, just where the politicians think the votes are, I believe. But in terms of actually using solar, we're so well aligned to solar in that we've got plenty of sunshine and plenty of land and so on, that we're actually one of the biggest users. I think it's us in the Netherlands that are the biggest users per capita of solar. So, and Germany's up there as well. But I think last year we were the biggest, but Netherlands had a bit of a spurt, more recently. So we're right up there in terms of the amount of use. And that's largely due to the number of private homes that have invested in installing solar on the roof. So we just have we're getting on to 3 million homes, and there's only supposed to be 800 million eligible homes in Australia that you could install solar on. So, well over, 20%, I guess it's getting up to, I guess it's over 30% now of our private homes. So it's been the Australian citizens that have taken matters into their own hands in investing in solar, which provides cheaper electricity now than you can buy it from the retailers. And then at the state level, we have our state government here in New South Wales is very aggressively promoting solar and has plans for making a big impact upon our energy needs with solar. So I think at the state level, we're doing a good job. It's just at the federal level, we're clearly lacking leadership. But perhaps this upcoming conference in Glasgow, just a week or two away, things will get sorted out a little bit. So internal politics are putting a lot of pressure on the federal government, and then international politics is putting pressure from another direction with the international countries wanting Australia to play a bigger role than they have up to now at the federal level. Thanks.
Thank you. Our last question will be for Manasi. So Manasi, how has your journey from ordinary to extraordinary been?
Thank you for that question. So I would like to frame it differently. It's been quite a journey. I've learned so many things, and I've faced so many failures, faced some successes, made some of my dreams come true. But it has been a journey, and I would say that this journey has been one of the most significant in my life, in the 15 years of my life that I've lived. So I've learned so many things. I've faced so many experiences. I've talked to people. I've cold emailed people and never got a response back. And then learned from it how to, properly cold email people. And there's just so many things that I've learned. So I would say it has been surreal. And I just want to keep walking on this path and just try to discover the whole potential I hold. So back in 2020, I never imagined, even before 2020, I never imagined I would be speaking at a TEDx, for example. And when I followed my instinct of writing something, I never expected it to turn out like this a year later. So I would say it has been surreal, but I'm truly hoping to discover my whole potential. That's what I've done, with the past year. I discovered what I could do and how much I just kind of rediscovered myself. So I would say I would like to continue doing that and just inspire so many Gen Zers across the globe, because we need problem solvers and we need them stat. So that's what I'm trying to do, and trying to share my message also through the TEDx platform. Thank you.
Thank you, Manasi, and thank you to all the speakers, honestly. This is unfortunately the end of our Q&A session. And so now we unfortunately have to say goodbye, because we've come to the point where we have to say goodbye. But to every one of you, no matter where you are in the world, we have absolutely loved your company. It has been such a pleasure and a privilege to bring to you TedxYouth at ReddamHouse 2021. But before we go, we'd like to acknowledge everyone who has made this event possible. The wonderful team of students who made this possible. It truly couldn't be the event without you. From the marketing teams to event managers and curators, to Aaron Yan, our speaker trainer, and to Samuel Katz, our organizer. A huge thanks, and please check them out on the website. And of course, who could forget the fabulous speakers who have spent lots of time developing their ideas and specialties, then to take more time to share them to us. It's really been a pleasure working with everyone, and a lot of effort has gone into making this event happen. It's been different to say the least, considering this event is online and unlike any other TedxYouth at ReddamHouse events in the past. But everyone's been handling it great, and what everyone's been able to achieve despite the circumstances is amazing. Last but definitely not least, we'd like to give our final thanks to our sponsors, Crimson Education and First Education. They've been so supportive of this event this year and in the past, and honestly, they're really passionate about what they do, education, learning, sharing ideas, and overall, they're just really great. Also, we'd like to give our special thanks to ReddamHouse for allowing this event to happen. It is TedxYouth at ReddamHouse after all, and a lot of the people behind the scenes are ReddamHouse students. Now, it's time to properly say goodbye, and the past few hours have truly been wonderful, and I hope you all had a wonderful time where you are. Remember, no matter how small you feel your presence may be, everyone behind this event truly values each and every one of you watching this. And no matter how small you may feel in this vast world, there's a story and an idea in each and every one of us. Thank you.